Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Bullard. I'm the first Vice President of the City Club. Happy New Year to you all, and welcome to another outstanding program. Today we're going to focus on the state of the region with Metro Executive Officer Mike Burton. I would like to welcome a new member here today, Carrie Strayhorn Brown from Boise Cascade Corporation. Carrie, are you here? Well, we are happy to have you as one of our members. I have a couple of announcements. Next Friday, January 16th, the City Club moves to its new home base at the Mac Club Ballroom. Please note the Mac's information and map to the Mac in this week's bulletin. The TriMet has generously provided 2 free Mac's passes for the January 16th and 23rd meetings, and these will be distributed at the January 16th program. So if you ride Max to the program, your ride home will be free. For those who drive, free parking is provided in the parking structure across from the Mac Club. Also, please note that increases in the luncheon prices become effective next week. Luncheon prices for members will be $16 per person, guests will be $18, and members may bring up to 2 guests to any one program at member prices as long as they name the guests at the time that they make their original reservation. So if you're bringing a guest to the meeting, please name those guests when you call in and make your reservations. Coffee tickets and non-member seating in the back will remain at $5, but it's limited to 25 people per program on a space available basis, and will be on a first-come, first-served basis as well. Another important announcement I'd like to make is that on January 16th, next week, the program will feature Governor John Kitzhaber with his annual State of the State address, and that will be at the Mac Club Ballroom. So I hope you all can come to that important event. And I would also like to note that beginning today, CityNet 30 cable television will be carrying City Club programs live. And thanks to the cooperation and financial support from TCI Cable Television, we will be able to broadcast live from the Mac Club from now on. So we welcome this new change in our broadcasting capability. Our board host today is Arnold Kogan, the managing partner of Kogan Owens Kogan, and a member of the Board of Governors. And he will be asking the first question of our speaker. Following Arnold's questions, we will open the program to questions from other City Club members in the audience. Please line up behind their microphone, which is over there. But line up even before Arnold is finished so that we can avoid any time lag between the questions and so that we have time to ask as many questions as possible. Please identify yourself as a member when you ask your question and limit your question to 30 seconds. I would also like to let you know that broadcast of the City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part because of corporate underwriting from Portland General Corporation, Wells Fargo Bank, and Providence Health Systems, and we are very grateful for their support. I would now like to introduce our speaker, Metro Executive Officer Mike Burton. He's appeared at the City Club on a number of occasions, and so rather than kind of the usual very large biographical data that we give, we would like to give you some insight into some of the more personal aspects of his life. Mike entered Oregon State College, but he graduated from Oregon State University. And he did this at a time when the school actually won football games. I don't know that he was running down the field, but he was elected student body president, mostly because he was able to convince quarterback Terry Baker to confine his running to the football field and not for student office. He is founding member of the noble and most singular order of the Blue Carbuncle, Portland's Sherlock Holmes Society, which annually performs strange Victorian rituals in honor of the detective. Mike is also an avid art collector, having an extensive collection of cigar box labels, antique masks from other cultures, and Russian icons. But his favorite piece of art is a Chuck Jones original rendition of Toulouse-Lautrec's Moulin Rouge, featuring Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, and Elmer Fudd. Well, now on a more serious note, Mike is the elected executive officer of Metro, the regional government serving our area, and this is for him as his first full-time political office, but he has certainly been busy on the political scene. In his 16-year career at Marylhurst College, Burton chaired the business management department, where he directed the college's undergraduate and graduate business and management programs, and he also has served as assistant to the college president. In his 3-year tenure as executive officer, he's been called upon to use his negotiating and mediation skills. For example, he was able to successfully resolve a 10-year dispute between Portland and Beaverton over where the services and ultimately the political boundary would be between those two cities. He has overseen implementation of Metro's $135.5 million open spaces bond measure approved by the voters in 1995 to acquire 6,000 acres of natural areas in the Metro area for preservation and protection, and is proud of the 50 separate transactions which have so far placed 3,000 of those acres in public trust. He has done things to streamline the government of Metro, to reduce its budget, and as well to reduce the personnel without reducing services, which is a major and important accomplishment for our area. He brings to this office more than 20 years of public service to Oregonians in both the state and regional government. He was elected to Metro Council in 1979 and was presiding officer when the region's urban growth boundary was adopted, a fact that he lives with daily at this point. And he also served in the House of Representatives for 5 consecutive terms, and in 1989 served as Speaker Pro Tem of the House. Metro has played an important role and continues in our area, and we are very fortunate to have such a skilled leader to be part of that organization. I would like you to welcome Mike Burton.
Thank you, Carolyn, at least for the last part of that introduction. I'm not sure, I may have a hard time living down the first part of that. I appreciate being invited to speak here and to lead off with this 1998 series for the City Club. This is a favorite time of the year for me. New Year's is because you have all of the media attention played on the passage of the year. The photo reviews of the events that have gone past, the focusing in on the events, the people who have affected and changed our lives. It's sort of a period of looking at change that occurs. But it struck me on that the most significant thing that I noted about what has changed in our world occurred while I was watching the Rose Bowl game. And there was a 60-second commercial for Pizza Hut. I don't know if you saw that. That probably, to me, exemplified more of the way the world has changed than anyone else. So it's a Pizza Hut ad, and it's inside a Pizza Hut restaurant, not in Portland, not in Ames, Iowa, but in Moscow, Russia. if you didn't see it, and it features Mikhail Gorbachev. And it's a real sign that the world has changed when the former premier of the communist Soviet Union is pitching pizza on American TV. I'll tell you, it tells me that nothing is the same and everything ever will be. But things do change, and often those changes are somewhat imperceptible. They sort of sneak up on us and we're not sure they're happening, and the next thing you know, there's different things controlling our lives. Thinking about digital computing and the microchip and how really totally encompassing that particular invention has come to be a part of our lives. The way in which we communicate, the way in which we do business is just unbelievable. And some other things we think will never change. They're so pervasive, they seem so solid, that we think these things will never change. But then often they do. And let me witness you this. A Northwest writer, David James Duncan, wrote earlier this year, it was a quote from a report from the Smithsonian Institute in 1899. In 1899, the Smithsonian Institute concluded a scientific study of the Pacific salmon with this sentence: "The quantities of salmon are beyond calculation and seem to be so great as to challenge human ingenuity to affect them in any way." A mere century later, it is the damage to the salmon and their world that is beyond calculation that seems so great as to challenge human ingenuity to affect it. World leaders recently met in Kyoto, Japan, to begin outlining a plan to combat global climate change. I think that meeting was long overdue. We've altered the planet and the atmosphere to such an extent that the question is no longer whether species will become extinct, but how many will and how quickly. The question is no longer if the water we drink will be contaminated, but at what level of contamination is tolerable. Acting locally on these issues is the foundation of efforts to reduce environmentally damaging activities, to conserve the natural resources that remain, and to begin restoring what we have already affected. While state environmental protection efforts, including the proposal recently to designate 10 outstanding water resource rivers, have been receiving quite a bit of attention, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to make significant strides right here in this region. We in this metropolitan area constitute about half of the state's population. Thus, we affect the environment of this state far more than any other area alone. What we can do here to reduce environmental degradation and the misuse which can have a positive effect on our air, our water, and our land elsewhere. There's no lack of challenges that face us. Let me show you, if I could, a slide. I have this. Well, I don't know how well you can see this. This is a map that I had the staff put together. It looks at about the last couple of generations, last 25 years, the streams that have disappeared in the metropolitan area. We've lost 390 miles of historical streams in the Portland metropolitan region that have disappeared either underground, piped under streets, they've been filled in, or they've become parking lots. If you can see on here the red streams, and I'm sorry about the color not coming out as well, but those are the ones that are lost. They're gone. And if that isn't a picture that will concern you, it should. In 1996, 213 miles of streams and rivers in our region alone were included on a state list of degraded water bodies violating state and federal water quality standards, according to the Department of Environmental Quality. More streams are likely to be added as additional data is collected. Just 10 years ago, the state of Oregon had 12 species on the federal threatened and endangered list. Today, there are 37, with numerous petitions pending. In addition, the state's own Sensitive Species Act now lists 121 species. More than 90% of the Pacific Northwest ancient forests have been cut. Surprisingly, we still have more old growth than any other part of the country. More than 80% of the historic wetlands of the lower Columbia River have been drained and filled. The Willamette River is already a drinking water source for people in the region, is being considered by many more communities that are running out of water. Debate just recently went on down in Wilsonville. The fear is that it may never become drinkable in this part of the region. And yet, isn't it odd that we have the debate at all? We made the mess. Shouldn't we be able to find a way to clean it up? Floodplains in the region are rapidly being developed. During the February 1996 floods, an estimated 189 new homes, that's homes built since 1992, in the Portland metro region were inundated with water. Flooding-related damages in this period cost the region $60 million. Soil erosion has clogged local streams. That problem may worsen as urban development continues. Consider this. Erosion from 1 acre of undisturbed forest is less than 1 ton per year, while erosion from a 1 acre construction site can range to 7 to 200 acres of soil per year. Consider the effect that has on stormwater drainage, let alone the salmon. Now, I apologize if this sounds a little bit like a New Year's hangover speech, but I think it's important that the resolutions I'm going to propose in a moment don't get left in a pile of forgotten good intentions. We do have an opportunity to restore and maintain a quality environment in this region and to do our part to continue to offer national and even global models for building sustainable communities. We have the historic precedent and we have the tools. We have a better opportunity than anywhere in the country to get it right, to conserve our most precious resources, our land, our air, and our water. There's ample evidence that environmental protection has provided a significant amount of horsepower for the Pacific Northwest economic boom in recent years. Environmental safeguards have helped and not hindered our economic vitality. Between 1988 and 1994, the number of jobs in the Pacific Northwest have increased by nearly 1 million, despite a transition away from natural resource extraction-based industries. During the same period, total personal income has increased by $42 billion per year, or a 24% increase per year. By all measures, we have prospered at a rate approximately 2 to 3 times the national average. At the same time, all of this positive economic activity, this rapid growth, has strained our land, our air, our water resources, and threatens our fabled quality of life. At its best, Metro is the region's champion for protecting these precious resources. It's the only government with a primary task for planning for the future. Metro works with local governments and citizens to protect the vitality of our neighborhoods and the quality of our environment. Today, Metro does this in the face of this incredible growth. Metro's part of the Oregon tradition, a tradition that some people call radical. Radical things such as the beach access law, or the bottle bill, or our statewide land use planning program. But what is so radical about being prudent with our use of resources, protecting the places that we love, and planning ahead? One of Metro's greatest challenges, unfortunately, is that people don't know who we are or what we do. When the voters of the Tri-County area endorsed Metro's charter in 1992, they gave it the task of planning for future growth to protect and enhance the region's quality of life. Metro, however, doesn't fix streets. We don't put out fires. We don't run health clinics for the poor. No one lives in Metro, and yet everyone lives in Metro. But think about what makes up our region, and Metro's role suddenly becomes clear to you. Our land, our air, our water, and economy all function as one region. Shouldn't our communities work that way as well? The trend is clear. This has become the urban century, a time when most of the world's population lives in cities. Right now, cities are the leading source of both national prosperity and our most pressing global problems. Metro's time is right. I'm convinced that at the very moment the region is receiving unprecedented national attention for its growth management programs through innovative land use and transportation program, we may become faint-hearted in meeting the challenges presented by rapid growth, and this is no time to blink. It is more important than ever that the region expands on a cooperative, coordinated approach to solving problems that have been responsible for so many of our achievements so far to date. In the past, the region has made progress on a number of fronts. We've improved air quality to the point, but only barely, that we are now in compliance with federal clean air standards. We've taken a truly regional approach to accomplish this goal. We've done this by our commitment to increasing transit options, by reducing pollution emissions from industry, and because individuals have changed their driving habits, and we must continue to do that. A rededication to these efforts for the future, including moving forward with the South-North Light Rail line, Airport Light Rail, and increased suburb-to-suburb bus service in the near term. Through a voter-approved measure, Metro has purchased about 3,000 acres of green spaces in the region on the way to our goal of doubling that before we're finished buying natural areas for long-term protection. And in what I know is a controversial decision, the Metro Council has maintained a tight urban growth boundary, reversing the trend of other metropolitan areas. While this region will increase its area about 2% to accommodate significant growth, Chicago will increase in land area by 25% while losing population. But still, we need to do more. On the eve of D-Day, General Dwight Eisenhower said, "In war, before the battle is joined, plans are everything. But once the shooting begins, plans are worthless." Well, quite frankly, the battle has been joined, and you might note some shooting is going on. But this is a battle we can't back away from, and we must use all the resources we have to engage the questions. It's not just a battle to build houses and industry. We must also ensure that we're protecting our natural landscape, our rivers, our wetlands, and we must ensure that every resident has easy access to nature in his or her own neighborhood. What does it take? We've already made some very difficult development decisions. Last year at this forum, I told you about Fairview, what's going on there, Gresham leading and developing its downtown area and building housing for the first time there in 20 years, and I might add, market-driven housing. Portland's redevelopment efforts along the Willamette and the Pearl, Hawthorne, and Broadway districts are well known to all of you. Beaverton, as the mayor has said there, has put a there. A new city center. The round at Beaverton Central includes a $50 million private investment that will create a new downtown center with retail, entertainment, housing, and civic developments. In Hillsborough has rezoned 1/3 of the entire city to accommodate light rail and mixed-use development such as going on at Orenco Station. Perhaps over the noise and all the shooting going on or missed the very positive steps being taken to meet our 2040 goals. These areas I've mentioned are booming with vitality, and I'd like to point out that there's no recalls going on in any of those cities. These projects continue to do well, but perhaps we forget why we encourage this type of project. You need to remember why we're doing this. It is because they help us meet our vision, a vision that says we will protect our natural resources, our water quality, a vision that says we will conserve farm and forest and open space. And each of these developments do this by using less land, by redeveloping and recycling existing urban land, and by building to preserve and conserve the green infrastructure. Still, with all of this stewardship of the ecosystem is there, we must intensify our efforts. We've developed some tools to assist with this task, but new tools and strategies are a multifaceted approach are needed to succeed. First and foremost, we must invest in education. Informed citizens make informed decisions. It's that simple. Children today are the generation that taught their parents how to recycle, and they're the ones that will teach us the way on these issues. A good example of this is the Saturday Academy Green City Data Projects. And you may know about those that are in place, I think, in over 60 of our schools throughout the region now, teaching young citizen scientists about the issues that we're faced with. Each of us need to become as familiar with a regional watershed map as we are with a regional road map. By that, I mean that we must be aware of what we're trying to protect. Education is the single most important element to creating sustainable, livable communities. Second, we need to develop real financial incentives for landowners to protect the environment, so the protection of natural areas can compete with development of resource extraction on a level playing field. Third, we need to bring a degree of simplicity and consistency to our environmental land use regulations. I'm not opposed to development, but sometimes we put stupid buildings in stupid places. What we need to do is make certain that we have good development in the right places. For example, limiting development along streams and rivers to reduce pollution and minimize property loss from flooding is simple common sense. Each year we spend millions of dollars of scarce public resources attempting to mitigate and repair problems which could have been avoided simply by respecting the boundaries of our streams, rivers, and wetlands. At the same time, we must be sensitive to the rights of property ownership and provide compensation when all other opportunities for legitimate land use are not there. Fourth, we must invest in our natural resource conservation. To succeed, we need to know the basics first. We need a comprehensive inventory of habitat areas, watersheds, and wetlands throughout the region. By that, I mean scientific research to provide the data for informed decisions, funds for acquisition, development operations and maintenance of our parks, natural areas, and fish and wildlife resources, and basic enforcement of our existing environmental laws. And finally, we must establish benchmarks to measure our progress from year to year over the long haul. Knowing what our goals are and knowing how we're getting there is as important as what we want to do. Progress on this may be slow, so it's imperative that we commit to monitoring the condition of the environment and the impact of our actions in a deliberate and consistent public manner. A regional approach makes sense. Our watersheds and our airsheds do not recognize political boundaries. Water runs downhill and the air goes with the wind. Similarly, bald eagles are unaware of what jurisdiction they're in when they fly from their winter roost in the headwaters of Dairy Creek in Washington County onto Sauvie Island in Multnomah County, and then on up to Lake Vancouver in Clark County, Washington. And salmon migrate up and down the Willamette and Columbia Rivers every month of the year. Currently, Metro is working on implementation of the Regional Stream and Floodplain Protection Plan, which will provide much-needed first steps for protecting the region's floodplains and waterways. We don't want this to happen any more than it already has. We can't lose any more of our streams. There is going to be resistance to the adoption of this plan. There already is. But even its adoption is a stopgap measure simply meant to address floodplain and water quality in a timely manner to address our already rapidly growing region. Longer-term and more comprehensive strategies will be needed. As with our past successes, the most effective solutions to environmental problems in the region will be cooperative, coordinated efforts. Metro's most effective role will be to set performance standards, provide data identifying affected habitat, and offering model ordinances for local governments to adopt. Metro sets the stage. It is local governments in the region working closely with citizens that are best equipped to administer programs to protect the environment, including the protection of our watersheds, habitats, our water quality, and preventing and managing flooding. Local governments make the crucial zoning and development decisions that will determine our success or failure at building sustainable communities. I'm committed to strengthening Metro's role in working relationships with these local governments to accomplish those goals. And certainly there is good news. Metro has worked with its local partners to identify and leverage resources to fund projects and help implement local and regional plans to meet community goals. One such program is a nationally recognized Habitat Restoration and Environmental Education Grants Program. The program provides the incentive and opportunity for people to be directly involved with the restoration and enhancement of their urban natural areas and educational programs that lead to greater stewardship of our resources. Metro has awarded more than 160 habitat restoration grants involving thousands of people throughout the region, allocating nearly $1 million, which has in turn leveraged an additional $5 million in local community support. As you came in today, I hope you had a chance to look at the displays out here and to meet some of the students and the teachers who are involved in these programs. On your table today, there's a scroll, and it lists the past members and recipients of these grants. Please take a look at some of those. because there are probably some schools and areas that you're familiar with. I'd like to ask, if I could, to have all the recipients who are here, because we have some of those students here, to stand up for a minute, and let's recognize them. And if you didn't have a chance before the meeting, I hope as you're going out, you'll stop by and talk to some of these young kids, because you're going to be absolutely amazed at the enthusiasm in which they've carried out these programs. Let me highlight 3 grant recipients to give you a sense of this program. The Deer Creek Elementary School in Tigard. Students there work with community and staff volunteers to restore and enhance about 5 acres of school property to create an outdoor living classroom. The area, both wetlands and woodland, will include a bioswale and learning stations. The students also are going to plant a butterfly and hummingbird garden. The Humboldt Elementary School in Portland, the Humboldt Learning Garden enters phase 2 with the addition of a frog bog. Students, staff, and community partners will research, design, and build a wetland adjacent to the school, offering an opportunity for hands-on environmental education. And the Happy Valley Wetland Park. This multi-year project will restore and enhance a 24-acre public wetland adjacent to the city park. Funds are being used to restore the natural hydrology of the wetland and continue to restore the area to native habitat. Currently, the wetland contains up to 75% non-native invasive plant species. So the project there involves Happy Valley Elementary School, the Northwest Service Academy, and the Pacific Habitat Services. These kids are doing a great, great job for us. We have a great deal to be proud of in this region. These young people represent our future. They're already leading and learning the way. We have the tools. I trust that we'll have the courage to carry it out. A few years ago, Marv Ross of the Oregon Trail Band wrote a song about the pioneers and what they found at this Eden's Gate. The last stanza of that song speaks to what those pioneers hoped for the future. I'd like to read it to you, not sing it to you. It goes like this. May the children of your children see the wild, red primrose grow, and hear the gentle rain of falling amongst these ancient groves. May the angels watch evermore to protect this perfect state. And I pray they'll see before they die the land at Eden's Gate. I only pray that we'll have the courage to make that possible for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that inspirational, interesting, very informative presentation. As the first person who has the opportunity to ask a question, I think it's probably evident that many, perhaps most, possibly even all, of the people in this room understand the benefits that Metro has to offer. And as we all know, many people feel disconnected with government at all levels, not just regional government, but at all levels of government. Unfortunately, regional government can seem to many like another layer of bureaucracy. And so, Mike, my question, how can we explain, and not just you and some people in the audience who have the responsibility for explaining, but how can we all explain Metro's contributions to the livability of this region in terms, in concrete terms, that people care about?
Well, it's an excellent question and an excellent point. And during my comments, I mentioned that everybody lives in Metro, but nobody lives in Metro. And so it's difficult sometimes, I think, for us to understand what it is that we have. We have 1 million visitors a year that go through the Metro Park Zoo. Over 1.5 million people who use the park facilities at places like Oxbow and Blue Lake, Chinook Landing. Hundreds of thousands of people use the convention center and the expo center and the other activities. And of course, you know, we have probably the best recycling program in the United States. 100,000 calls a year comes into Metro from people finding out ways to encourage that. So the services are there. Perhaps what's more esoteric and difficult to understand by the public is, what does the planning do for you? What does planning do for you? If you don't have planning, then, won't things just kind of work out? And I guess I would submit that, and Arnold, you know this better than I do because you were there before I was, when Oregon started to understand that it needed to plan what was going to happen to this state. You can do two things. You can let it happen to you, or you can try to make it happen the way you want to. And so there is, in the goals for the statewide land use goals and guidelines, the very first one says that you'll have citizen involvement. And that's a recognition that our understanding of how this state should go and grow starts with the citizens. And so it's incumbent on each one of you to understand what that means to you. That indeed, if we didn't have that planning in place, and Metro is responsible in this region for the 24 cities inside the region that all butt up against each other in trying to carry out those land use concepts and ideas, that in the absence of that, this place wouldn't be the same at all today. That I believe that you'd see a deterioration, degradation of farmland, of forest land, of even greater and worse degradation of our streams and natural areas than you see now. So take a look around you. Take a look around at where you live. Take a look around at other cities. A friend of mine just sent me an article from another city, and I don't think we should compare places sometimes because nowhere's like this. A small geographical area that's unparalleled. We have the finest soil in the world. You cannot duplicate the growing conditions in the Willamette Valley. The soil's so rich out there you can eat it. You don't have to plant anything in it. Well, let me tell you, that's worth hanging on to. And it's worth having an economy that does the right thing in the urban areas and has the vitality of these cities and the areas that I'm talking about, the kinds of things that are happening at Fairview Village, at Orinco Station, the kinds of things that we're doing to make very livable communities for the people is what's different. And you don't do that by accident. You do that because you think about it, you set some vision for yourself, and you keep your eye on the prize. We have to constantly remind ourselves, I believe, about what we're trying to do about all of this. We're trying to build livable communities. And so there's lots of very specific, concrete decisions, and I think everybody in this club, because you're members of this particular club, need to voice that in writing letters to the newspapers, in talking to your neighbors about it. Have them think about it. Don't let them take it for granted, because that would be the worst thing we could do, is resting on our laurels and assuming this is just going to go on this way without thinking about it. Yes, sir.
Chris Smith, club member. I want to thank you for all the wonderful work that Metro is doing. And I hope you'll excuse me because I'm going to ask you a question I've asked in other forums, but I think it's pertinent today to your comments about knowing the stream map as well as you know the road map. This month, the council will vote on the transportation functional plan component of the Region 2040 framework. That plan includes the reclassification of Cornell Road between Washington County and Multnomah County as a collector of regional significance.
I knew we talked about this before.
Both the Hillside and NWDA neighborhoods in Portland have unanimously opposed that reclassification, feeling that the land use and street networks at the Multnomah County end are not appropriate to that classification. But putting that aside, that road also passes through some very environmentally sensitive areas, including the Balch Creek watershed. What are the chances that in this call the stream might become more important than the road?
Well, I think, and actually Linda Peters is sitting here, who's the Washington County chair. The conflict, I think, comes from the people along that area thinking that the road problem is everybody from Washington County driving into the city of Portland. Actually, I think people go both ways, and so that's why it's regional in nature. And we have a role to play. I think the impact on that environment, and that watershed, in that area is a significant part of what should be looked at. And quite frankly, that's one of the decisions and the choices that the region has to make. When you look at trying to improve your transportation system, what are you doing to the land? Because when you make a land decision, you're making a transportation decision. When you make a transportation decision, you're making a land use decision. And those affect the environment and what's there. And if we have to then say we want to restrict the elements of that road to protect that area in that way, and that's the decision that part of the decision that should be taken into account, then we also need to recognize that the transversing that area is going to slow down for people in both ways. And that then means, can you find other options? And other options would, of course, be, as Ray Palani is undoubtedly going to ask me, to increase our transit options. Sorry, Ray, I didn't mean to. I saw you back there. So. Mr. Liberty.
Robert Liberty, City Club member, and before I ask my question, this really is a remarkable event. This is the only time in your life, Mr. Burton, that you're going to have Steve Schell, Ray Palani, and Linda Peters kneeling in front of you.
I usually don't get that kind of respect at all, I assure you.
You noticed I didn't, but
No.
you've provided an eloquent description of why Metro is important to the quality of life here, but meanwhile, within a block of this place, Mr. Sizemore's canvassers are collecting signatures to abolish Metro. What can you say to people in Cove or Coquille or the Dalles or Baker City about why they should vote against Mr. Sizemore's measure?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, what's being proposed is a constitutional amendment that takes away the right of the people to form governments, and that's really what it does. What it says is that it creates a right to not have a particular kind of government, so you have a constitutional prohibition against that. So you're essentially giving up a right. The other thing is that I think this is an attack against land use planning in Oregon. I think that's really what's driving it. I think underneath it is, it's an attempt to try to say that you cannot have a coordinated program between jurisdictions or between the state and jurisdictions on how you're going to deal with land use questions. And that's fundamentally what it is. The cities of Coquille and Heppner and those other cities in the state have to deal with those, and that will be partly lost to them by the way that the attack is being made against land use planning. And also, those organizations, and the Supreme Court decision on this, on the ballot title, said that while it wasn't specific, it would probably eliminate the councils of governments and some of the economic development agencies that were created by those local governments, and they would probably lose their ability to form this. So what they're going to do in order to have those kind of activities would be to have to create additional separate single-purpose agencies to carry out those activities. So we're really talking here about taking away people's right to form a government if they decided to. Nobody said you had to do this, but it takes that away. Secondly, it requires more government because you still have to have transportation activities and land use activities, but you can't do those jointly now. You'd have to break it up and have separate agencies to do each one of those, which is more costly and more cumbersome, and by the way, probably wouldn't have any decisions being made. So the people around the state would lose their option, no matter whether they're in Burns or in Lincoln City, to do the kinds of thing that those citizens may decide to do. They would be banned under the Constitution from carrying out their own wishes in forming those types of governments. Steve.
Mike, you mentioned this is Steve Schell, member. You mentioned that there's some shooting going on, and I'm not about to aim a shot at the messenger, but I'd like you to think about the silly petition of Mr. Sizemore, the somewhat less silly remark of outgoing Mayor Gussie McRobert that Metro is so dysfunctional, and the concern about the repeal or the recall of Craig Longnicki and the other council members in Milwaukee. It seems to me that we are not communicating adequately with our citizens, and you certainly mentioned education, and you mentioned some very specific items in your New Year's resolutions. I wonder if you could give for us in 8 or 10 sentences, or just a few words, what it is we're really striving for here. What is your vision of how this region is going to look if we put all these planning mechanisms in place?
Well, the vision is not so much mine as it is the people of this region, because if you recall, and I hope people in this room will do that, the growth concept that Metro is trying to carry out is one that through a number of years, before I got into this office, we had conversations with the public about what we thought was the vision for this region. And I think it's the most telling thing that we have. When you look at what the citizens collectively said about this place, it can be summarized in a couple of sentences, I think. One of them says that the people want a place where they can continue to see Mount Hood. You know, you think about that. What that's talking about is talking about air quality. It's talking about being able to see that place as a natural resource area, a mountain that isn't developed all the way up to the top. And so it speaks to our dedication to that. And another part of that vision that I like the most is the one that says that the people of this region want a place where every child has an opportunity to walk to the library. You know, now think about that. Think about that. To walk to a library. It's a dedication to future generations, to our kids. It's a place that talks about safe streets. It's a place that talks about services being close by. And it talks to our commitment to that. And that's really what this is all about. All the things that we're doing in our planning efforts really amount to trying to deal with the ability to have livable communities that the people in this region have said are livable communities. And the vote down in Milwaukee, you know, may be more cumbersome and problematic to me in the fact that 60% of the people didn't bother to vote than it is that 18% decided that they would put out some very good local elected officials. The concern I've got about the vote in Milwaukee is not its outcome, although I think that was tragic, but it's the fact that more people decided not to vote than did. And we've got a problem, because when we talk about this community and we talk about our vision and our future, it means everybody's involvement. So what we're looking for is what you want. And if people in the region tell us to do something else, that's what'll happen. I don't think that's happened because of that one vote down there. In fact, Rob Kappa, who is one of the remaining two city councilors down there, called me right after that vote to state that he favors light rail. He would like to see it down in that area. We talked about taking it down 224 instead of going into the city, and that's fine. The other remaining councilor, I believe, feels the same way, Carolyn Tamai, and they're both running, I think, ultimately for mayor down there. So we'll wait to see how that comes out. And I don't think the people down there were turning their back on cooperation, but I don't know that we've heard from the majority of those people. So what we need to do in this is to keep this going. And what we're doing is setting these overall concepts for what we hear the people are telling us. And it does talk to trying to reasonably use the land that we have. They don't make any more of it, folks. Land is one of those things you're not making a whole lot more of. And so if we don't use it right, it'll be gone. And recovering it, in those cases, is a lot more difficult. The degradation of our streams is already going to cost us a great deal more to fix those than it would have been if we hadn't done this in the first place. So the planning efforts try to avoid those mistakes, and it does that hopefully with the public in mind. Ray.
Ray Polani, City Club member. You mentioned the streams disappeared. You mentioned that we need to preserve and restore our watershed. And obviously, the problem has been too much paving. The regional framework plan proposes two, I'm using the words that I heard, modest parkways that will be built. Parkways being a euphemism for freeways. And at the same time, presumably, there is a commitment to expanded transit. There is no transit in suburbs, as we know, evenings, Saturdays, Sundays. How can you expect that it will be different if we continue to make it easier for people to drive and impossible for them to use transit?
Well, I think you said it all there. I think we have to do all of these things. I was over yesterday, 2 days ago it was, in Vancouver, Washington, at a meeting with a bi-state meeting called by the Identity Clark County to address the question of barge traffic on the river, barge and tows going up the river, and the fact that they create openings, a lot of openings of the I-5 bridge. And it struck me, it's an odd thing anyway, this is the only, I believe it's the only bridge on the interstate system that has a lift span on it. You know, we've got this whole interstate system, it's the only one in the country, so it's kind of a particular special thing. But here's the debate going on. There's people who are worried about the bridge opening so often because that backs up traffic, and the barge owners saying that they need to move commerce. And they move commerce because the port of Portland, between the port of Portland and Portland, Vancouver, this is the largest grain exporting port in the world, the second largest wheat exporting port in the world. And so it's valuable to us. And I sat there listening to this debate about whether we should open or close the I-5 span bridge and what we should do about the railroad bridge. And I thought, my God, if they end up taking those barges off the river, or if they reduce the ability to move barge traffic up and down that river, it increases the truck traffic along I-84 up the gorge and on both sides of the river and creates even more problems there. Now, these are not simple issues. To build a new bridge across I-5 that would span those two spans would cost about $1 billion. To fix the railroad bridge would cost $8 to $10 million. But we need to solve that kind of problem, and that's one of the things that fits into it. So a balance. Now, what the other thing you can do, obviously, to reduce the problem on the south-north end of it is to put light rail across that bridge and get more cars off of it into that. And if you've got a 5 or 10% ridership, you're just reducing the problem on that area that much. So clearly, and again, and I say this over and over again, we need to solve a transportation system problem, which includes everything from the airport problem to the barge problems, to road problems, freight and truck problems, to providing more transit. The issue for us constantly is the allocation of resources. The dollars simply aren't there. That's a choice that we have to make as a society. I'm willing, and I think everybody in this room is probably willing, to put more money into transit options. But we also need to recognize that there needs to be a total transportation system here in this region. It's going to cost us for all of those things. We've got to deal with all of them. Linda?
Oops, excuse me. Linda Peters,
You're on your knees too
City
long.
Club member. Yeah, knees are fine. And Chair of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. I'm reminded of probably 10 years ago when I was chairing the City Club's Standing Committee on Land Use and Transportation, a meeting where we first heard, I think Bob Stacy was the one who had been to a conference and heard about, he had heard Andres Duany talk about alternatives to sprawl and how you could actually keep a contained growth boundary and do different kinds of development within it and protect your farm and forest land and your air quality and so on. And I've never been in a place where the electricity of an idea was so intense as at that meeting. To think that within 10 years we've gone from an idea that can turn you on to the reality that we see on the ground around us gives me enormous hope that the problems we're facing right now are going to be solvable too. And I'm going to ask you to comment on what I think is part of the reason that we've been able to do all of this. One, the kind of civic culture that's represented here in the City Club, and two, at Metro, we don't have just a Metro Council and an executive and a staff. We also have a policy advisory committee that's made up of elected local officials, and an enormous amount of what comes to the Metro Council for planning goes first through that body, and an enormous amount of consensus is built there through all sorts of sometimes very contentious struggles, but bubbling out of that is something that has a degree of commitment from people all around the region. Would you comment about how you see those parts of Metro functioning together and that role on Metro's part of fostering that local government analysis and consensus building?
Well, and I appreciate that question, Linda, because it is a key to what we're doing. And I think a lot of times there is some, at least it would appear if you read the anecdotal information occasionally that comes out in the newspapers about this, that Metro sits down and sort of dictates everything straight down. We do have a tremendous amount of authority in the charter that was given to us, but as I point out to people, power doesn't come from a written piece of authority. Power comes from your ability to bring people with you and to really stand aside as the decisions are being made in the right way. As I mentioned, I think in my remarks, Metro is the facilitating body. We're the convener government, if you would, setting the broad standards for what should happen. But the local governments are the ones that have to make it happen. And the process, I think, that's gone on for the last couple of years in looking at our designation of urban reserves, the functional plans, and what will ultimately become the urban growth boundary, in dealing with the titles that deal with everything from the streams and wetlands issues to affordable housing, has come to us after strong debate and involvement from all those local jurisdictions at the Metropolitan Planning Advisory Committee and through the Joint Policy Advisory on Transportation, or JPAC. Those organizations are at the table. Yesterday I was walking down to my office and I looked into this room and there was a room full of people, and it was called Metropolitan Technical Advisory Committee, or MTAC, which is the planners from all the jurisdictions. And I'm just amazed at how in a place, and it was a reporter from another city that came by, and I pointed this out, and they said, my gosh, they're not fighting with each other in there. I said, well, they might be, but you can't hear them through the glass, I guess. But he said, but they're all sitting down. I said, yes, and they're going to have recommendations. They're going to sit down, they're going to have recommendations, and it's going to come up and develop into policy, and they're amazed by this from places around the country. It works better here than anywhere else. And it works, I think, because you do have a final decision-making body that takes into account all of the needs of the region, of the 24 cities and all of these jurisdictions, and then makes those decisions in accordance, hopefully, with the best direction for the whole region. I hear Linda Peters and other people on the impact making statements and voting for things that they say, gee, I don't know how this is going to go back home. A city councilor from Lake Oswego recently talking about affordable housing, and somebody said, well, what are you doing about affordable housing? He said, well, I don't know, but I'm going to go back because we need to be a part of this as much as every other jurisdiction does here. That doesn't happen anywhere else on the planet. Let me tell you, it doesn't happen. And we do it better than anybody else, and that's what makes this work. And Metro's job is to make sure that we have those standards, that we have a framework, and we have a forum for that to occur, and hopefully that's a job that we'll play. Yes?
Hi, Amy Chomowitz, City Club member. The City of Portland Planning Bureau is developing neighborhood plans, and many citizens are concerned that these plans are going to focus too much on increasing density. And what is Metro going to do to make sure that these plans address increasing density, but balance that with all of the other 2040 goals that you've been talking about?
Well, first of all, I think nobody's ever done this before. I start to remember people, I say, gosh, the density levels or the achievement of goals to increase housing or employment opportunities in any given jurisdiction is one that got built from the cities up. I think some of those were very ambitious plans, and I'm concerned that the degree to which some expectation of how infill and redevelopment or density will occur may be ambitious. Well, the fact is that planning is a dynamic process. It's a living thing. If you sort of sit down and say, that's it, and that's it in stone, you're going to make a mistake. One of the things that we've done in the planning process in adopting the regional framework plan was to include performance standards, which will give us some way of measuring how we're doing. And I insisted that that go in there, and the council has developed, I think, some very serious ways to look at that. Because what we do as we go along trying to do this, we may find a year down the road that we're not getting to those densities, or the market's not responding the way that we expected. You then have two options. You can change your goals, or you can change the methodology by which you were trying to achieve those goals. But if you're not doing this on a day-to-day almost basis, if you're not checking to see where you're going, then all plans will become static and they're stupid. So we need to figure out, and that's what the city's doing right now, and other cities are doing that. They're going into the neighborhoods, and I think in some cases testing everybody's will and perhaps patience. But that's the input that comes back from the communities. And we need to sit down and explain with those neighborhoods what that means to them. Sometimes I think the neighborhoods will discover it's not as bad as they thought it was. In some cases, I think they'll say it won't work, because there's a point at which density fails. And we need to understand that. And the original planning methods called for not affecting about 75% of the neighborhoods, and that's a process that will go on now for the next couple of years as we find that out. But we need to do that dynamically and not be stuck saying this is the absolute end of that. And I would argue that one of the reasons that we're going to expand the urban growth boundary and do it right is because part of that process is to realistically understand what we can do inside the existing boundary without destroying the environments there. So those are the choices and trade-offs, and we will be talking to all the cities and listening to them and hearing what their concerns are and helping them make those adjustments. Ned Look.
This will be our last question.
Ned Look, member. Mike, you touched on the matter of housing. There is real concern in neighborhoods about the disruption of their neighborhood because of density of housing, number one. There's real concern about new housing and the cost of new housing based on the urban growth boundary that we have established. There is another real concern on the need for low-cost housing and how we distribute it equitably throughout the region. How can you give assurance to these neighborhoods, to these people who are looking for homes, and particularly also the need for the allocation of low-cost housing throughout the region, and what role Metro is playing in it?
Thank you. Yeah, and I think I need to start the answer to that question by making certain everybody understands the debate that we've been hearing at Metro lately is around affordable housing, which is different than subsidized housing. There's a difference. We talk about affordable housing, we're really talking about the ability to look at housing that might be built at a cost of $130,000 to $140,000 today, believe it or not. I asked somebody one time, I said, what's an affordable house? They said it depends on how much money you have. So there's really two issues here, because affordability has a lot to do with the social issue of your income, your size of family, your education, your location to a job, and then there's the cost of the house unit itself. And I would argue that there's some things that can be done, and they're being done in the region to try to build housing that is not as expensive as some things we've seen built. And I think the market perhaps has been overbuilt. Smaller lot sizes, smaller houses. The average size of a house being built today is 40% bigger than it was 25 years ago. These huge houses on small lots. They don't need to be that much. And there are projects out in Forest Grove, for example, where they're building houses that are average price about $115,000. We need to encourage that, and that can be done. The allocation of assisted housing, that is housing that needs a subsidy, is actually a state rule that requires a fair share allocation of those throughout the various regions. Every region is expected to do it. The best way to build and provide that kind of housing is to not put it in ghettos. You can't put it all in one jurisdiction. It should be almost invisible to the eye as to what type of housing is out there. We still tend to build those in areas, and they tend to build them in large numbers, and I think that's a mistake. So the allocation of that in order to maintain balance of the community has to be also, I would argue, the best place to build some of those is where you have a great opportunity for transit. Because if you look at the price of operating an automobile in Oregon today, it's about $6,000 per car. If somebody has to have two cars because they can't get to work, that's a $12,000 hit against that family right there. You want to talk about dealing with affordability or with housing costs, try to reduce that for those folks. And that's done by providing good, adequate, and on-time bus service that Ray Polani and all the rest of us would like to have. So there's different approaches to that, and we need to get on all levels, both affordable housing and the subsidized housing efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. I'm always encouraged when I see how we're working as a region. I think it's an important part of our work here. I would like to remind you that if you are a guest here, to sign our guest book at the back of the room. And those of you who are members who have brought guests, be sure to share applications with your guests. And we are adjourned.